So what other great original content does Disney Plus have besides The Mandalorian? What else are they going to really use to draw us in? Well, it's a movie featuring an imaginary polar bear. Yeah. Timmy Failure, Mistakes Were Made stars newcomer Winslow Fegley as Timmy, a young kid in Portland, Oregon, who runs his own detective agency going around town trying to solve cases with the help of an imaginary polar bear named Total, though at the expense of Timmy's school and personal life. However, he finds himself needing his classmates' help when his mother's Segway goes missing and he believes it to have been stolen, leading to what seems like a much larger investigation. This was based on a children's book series of the same name, and I really don't know too much about it. I looked it up right before this, and I heard they were released a few years ago, and they were pretty successful. But yeah, this is about as family friendly as it's going to get. Though what drew me into this movie was the fact that it was written and directed by Tom McCarthy, who you may know better as the writer and director of the Best Picture winner Spotlight, and whose earlier work I also really appreciate, such as The Station Agent and Win-Win. He actually has another movie coming out later this year, Stillwater, and that's actually getting a theatrical release. But I was very curious to see what would lead him to go from a movie about one of the biggest abuse scandals in recent memory to a kid's movie featuring an imaginary polar bear. And I was surprised when I was looking this up that he actually has contributed a fair amount of screenplays to Disney and Pixar over the years, including Up as well as Christopher Robin, the latter of which I did really enjoy despite the mixed reviews. But this is his first time both writing and directing a family-friendly feature, and if those other movies weren't any indication, this shows he really does have a knack for this sort of stuff. So, here we go. This is my review of Timmy Failure. Despite being a movie mostly aimed at kids, this is surprisingly a lot more mature than you would think. There are subtle hints as to why Timmy is the way he is and why he hangs out with an imaginary friend and shuts so many of his real friends out. It's easy for a movie like this to fall into some trap where it dumbs down its dialogue so much that it ends up talking down to kids. And while there are times where this can be really cute, it never talks down to the kids that will ultimately watch this movie. It has a child protagonist with a very vivid imagination, but he is very smart for his age, and he's able to maneuver around the town on his own. This isn't just a run of scenes where he's essentially the butt of every joke, where his imagination gets the better of him and he makes everything seem worse than they are. That does happen from time to time, but it's only done sparingly, and it's only used to either advance the plot or tell jokes that actually, are funny. This kid thinks of himself as this Batman, James Bond sort of figure, and that's where a lot of the funniest lines come in. He describes everything in the style of a film noir, where he has this very cynical description of everything, such as how his city's crumbling. He'd be very deadpan in the way in which he described things, and it would be often quite funny. Plus, he'd have these vivid daydreams where he'd imagine himself fighting against criminals, and it would often remind me of the scenes from A Christmas Story, where Ralphie would imagine these hypothetical scenarios where he'd stop criminals with his BB gun. Winslow Fegley was a blast as Timmy, and his timing in each scene was really spot on. I know Disney Plus will reach a lot of people, though I wouldn't consider this a mainstream movie, so I do hope he does have the opportunity to take on something with a much larger scale, because he is a very likable protagonist. Of the supporting cast, both Ophelia Lovibond and Kyle Bornheimer are great as Timmy's mom and her new boyfriend. But by far, the standout from the supporting cast is Wallace Shawn as Timmy's teacher, and he actually has a substantial role here. He was very scene-chewing with his delivery, and he'd exaggerate nearly every line, and it was hilarious. He's a character actor who I feel can be a bit underappreciated, and this really gives him some of his best material in some time. I'd say in terms of the supporting characters, outside of the ones I mentioned earlier, everyone else is essentially this throwaway character. There are a few characters who are heavily featured, but they're mainly there for one-note jokes that just don't work, or just to advance the plot for convenience's sake. Like, many of Timmy's classmates are really underwritten. He has one friend who's this worrywart, and Timmy drags him along for various tasks, but most of these scenes are just him complaining and giving some over-the-top scared reaction that just isn't funny. Or there's another classmate who has a crush on Timmy, and he doesn't really feel the same way, but he still needs her help from time to time, so she makes him do things he doesn't care to do in order to get her help, and those are a little stale as well. Craig Robinson appears as Timmy's counselor, and he's probably the one who goes most to waste. The counselor or therapist character in a movie or show is one of the biggest stock characters that are hard to write as interesting, because they're mainly there to just listen to characters complain and in turn give some motivational speech or just explain parts of the movie for the audience, and that's exactly what happens here. I'd also say this sometimes resolves conflict almost way too quickly. Characters will make these decisions at times that are meant to be truly difficult decisions, and you think it'll affect the movie for almost the remainder of its runtime, only for it to be resolved within like 5 to 10 minutes. But when it comes to this movie's issues, I get it. I know this is not meant to be an overly complex movie. This is written with a certain target audience in mind, and obviously I am not in that target audience. And if you're someone else who's watching it and it's not also in that target audience, it's very easy to just rip on this movie. But there are times where you'll have to keep in mind that certain movies are written for certain audiences, and this is one of them. Again, there are things that just don't work for me, but I can tell you, kids certainly aren't going to mind, and they're going to get a kick out of this movie, and that's ultimately who this is for. This one was a nice surprise, to be honest. This was nowhere near on my radar up until I found out who was involved, so I went in with an open mind, and I was thoroughly entertained. Like I said, this movie does cater to a certain demographic, so that is something to keep in mind if there are some things that don't work for you. But this is surprisingly mature, well written, and very funny. Kids are absolutely gonna love this, but there's something for adults to enjoy too. Timmy Failure, Mistakes Were Made, gets a 7 out of 10. Like I said, this is on Disney Plus, so you can just log on and check it out if you have that. Though I would be interested to see how this would have fared if Disney Plus wasn't a thing. It kind of reminded me of those late 90s, early 2000s made-for-TV movies on the Disney Channel. And I feel like if this was maybe even 5 years ago, it probably would have gotten released there. But it's still a fun time. But let me know, did you see Timmy Failure, or are you planning to see Timmy Failure? And what were your thoughts? Did you find it to be funny, or was it too kid-friendly for your taste? And do you hope that Disney makes more movies like this in the future? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, if you like what you see, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you next time.